Have you ever dreamed of making your own video game? Imagine seeing your ideas come to life, creating something others can play, and finally saying, I made this. Creating your first video game is like stepping into a new world. It's exciting, challenging, and incredibly rewarding. I've been playing games for as long as I can remember, and I've always dreamed of making one. But dreaming about it and actually doing it are two very different things. When I finally decided to start, I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I didn't realize just how much there was to learn and how overwhelming it could be at first. Starting from zero is tough. I had no prior experience in coding, game design, or using game engines. I chose Godot because it's beginner friendly, but even then, it felt like a steep mountain to climb. The first challenge was understanding the basics of Godot, specifically nodes, scenes, and scripting. At first, it all sounded like a foreign language. Nodes are the building blocks of everything in Godot, and they're incredibly powerful, but wrapping my head around how they worked was overwhelming. I didn't realize how many types of nodes there were or how they interacted with each other. Scenes added another layer of complexity. The idea of combining multiple nodes into a scene made sense in theory, but in practice, managing multiple scenes and figuring out how to connect them felt chaotic. I struggled to organize my project, deciding which nodes and scenes should handle specific parts of the game like the player, enemies, levels, and UI. Then there was the scripting. Godot uses GD script, which is beginner friendly, but as someone with no coding background, even simple tasks felt daunting. Writing code to control player movement, detect collisions, or spawn enemies was a slow and frustrating process. Every time I ran the game, I seemed to hit another error or bug. Debugging became a daily part of my routine, and at times, it felt like I was solving one problem only to create three more. I spent hours watching YouTube tutorials, pausing and rewinding every few seconds just to understand how to do basic things. Even something as simple as getting a button to work in the UI or making a player jump required careful attention to detail and a lot of trial and error. On top of all that, learning to manage the project as a whole was a challenge in itself. I underestimated how tricky it could be to keep everything organized. Naming nodes, structuring scenes, and ensuring scripts didn't conflict with each other. There were moments when my project became such a mess that I had to stop and reorganize everything from scratch. It was frustrating, and there were countless times when I thought I'd never figure it all out. But every time I solved a problem, no matter how small, I gained a bit more confidence. Those tiny victories kept me going, even when the bigger challenges seemed impossible. But I kept going. Little by little, I began to understand how Godot worked. Nodes became less intimidating, and GD script started to make sense. I started experimenting, building small prototypes, creating basic levels, and learning through trial and error. Mistakes were my best teachers. I'd often spend hours fixing bugs or figuring out why something didn't work the way I expected. But every time I solved a problem, it felt like a victory. One of the biggest lessons I learned was to start small. I didn't try to create a massive open world game. I focused on something simple, something I could finish. As I built my game, I discovered what I enjoyed most: designing levels. There's something magical about creating spaces for players to explore and seeing it all come together. I loved adding details, tweaking the difficulty, and imagining how players would experience my world. But not everything was fun. Animations, for example, felt tedious and frustrating. It's not my strong suit, and I realized that not every part of game development will be enjoyable. And that's okay, it's all part of the process. After weeks of hard work, there was a moment I'll never forget: the moment my game was playable from start to finish. It wasn't perfect, but it was complete, and for the first time, I could play something I had created entirely from scratch. I remember hitting play and watching the game come to life. My characters moved the way I had envisioned, the enemies responded just as I had programmed them, and the level had a sense of flow and purpose. It was surreal. This was more than just a collection of code and assets, it was the realization of a dream I'd carried for years. But it wasn't just about seeing the finished product, it was about everything that had led up to that moment. The late nights spent debugging, the small victories when things finally worked, the hours of trial and error, it all added up to this one incredible experience. I played through the game over and over again, tweaking small details, fixing bugs, and polishing areas that needed improvement. Each time I played, I couldn't help but smile. Sure, it wasn't a massive, high budget masterpiece, but it was my game, and every pixel and line of code reflected the effort and passion I had poured into it. One of the most satisfying parts was watching others play it. Seeing their reactions got frustrated at a challenging section was a whole new level of joy. It made me realize that my game could create experiences for others just like the games I had played growing up. In that moment, I felt like a real game developer. It wasn't just a hobby anymore, it was a tangible creation, a product of my determination and creativity. That feeling of accomplishment is something I'll carry with me forever. This journey has been one of the most challenging and rewarding experiences of my life. I've learned so much from the tiniest details of how nodes work to implementing complex mechanics like physics and enemy AI. It wasn't easy and there were times I wanted to give up. But I pushed through, and at the end, I had something to show for it. My first game might not be perfect, but it's mine. To anyone out there dreaming of making games, I want to say this: start small, be patient, and don't give up. Every mistake is a step forward, and every hour you spend learning brings you closer to your goal. Have you ever thought about creating a game? What's stopping you? Share your experiences in the comments. I'd love to hear your stories. And if you're just starting out, check out my other videos. Together we can turn dreams into games.